Welcome into live number 2 of Wednesday, January 24th. Today, or tonight, is a special one. Of course, Don Callahan and I had Patrick Settis on earlier today on the Noon Dish. Shout out to the folks that are in here that were there, the true hardcore. But tonight, we've got the Inside Carolina Roundtable. And of course, we're always sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. Buck Sanders, I'm going to come to you first now. I remember a saying, realistic fans think, was it 2001 or 2002?
Been a while.
It's been a while. So here we are, North Carolina's 2024 schedule released. I want to go around the room a little bit, and then we'll get into it in more detail. But just overall thoughts when you saw it. I don't see much to argue with this time around.
I don't think there is. I don't believe Mack Brown can put the ACC on blast over this schedule. If you were going to quibble about something, back-to-back road games against Virginia and Florida State, but that would be just a minor quibble compared to some of the schedules we've seen in the past. And the finish certainly not as brutal as the last 2 years. Maybe the pain will be less acute if it's spread out over the course of the season.
Indeed. Of course, that finishes with North Carolina State again late, November 30th. Taylor, since you were here first and joined me early, your overall thoughts on what you see here from the ACC for North Carolina?
Yeah, outside of the game against Minnesota, against another Power 5 team, I think this is a pretty favorable schedule in terms of starting. And I think the Carolina fan has to mentally prepare themselves to be 5-0 going into the second month of the season. And then it's kind of Jesus take the wheel.
Greg, you're up next. If you're wanting a spectacular home schedule, this ain't it. But North Carolina's schedule certainly looks fairly favorable. Don't forget to click the mute button because I don't want to call somebody out already.
I'm always prepared, Tommy.
I should know better.
It's one of those funny dynamics of fans complain sometimes when the schedule's too hard because you may not win a lot of games. But if you want to win a lot of games, you need to schedule a cream puff schedule, right? Especially non-conference. I don't know if I'd go quite so far as to call this a cream puff schedule with the road trip to Minnesota and JMU. But Charlotte and NC Central certainly are games that everybody's going to already circle as wins. And then we'll get into it, of course. But when you start looking at Pitt, Georgia Tech, Wake Forest, NC State, there's a couple games there that should be challenging, but that's about it. So it is a very favorable schedule. I think it starts out exactly the way you want it. When you've got some new pieces, especially on the offensive side of the ball, you've got a new defensive coordinator in place. You need a month of non-conference games to kind of work into things and work out some kinks. And North Carolina is going to have that ability. And I think, as Taylor mentioned, you kind of set the table to be able to enter into ACC play on a favorable note, and then you kind of see where things take you from there.
Jason, get in. At Minnesota, that's one of those, you jump into the 8-foot part of the pool before you wade up to the shallow end over the next couple of weeks. But your thoughts here overall?
I mean, my first thought when I saw this was, wow, that really sets up nicely. I mean, if I were coaching this team, the one thing that I would want different is I would want that Minnesota game as my maybe second or third game instead of the first game. But otherwise, I mean, I look at this schedule and, there's no Clemson, which we already knew, but just in terms of how this all kind of squares out, Duke being the first conference game, Duke with a new coach and having lost a large amount of, fifth year and super senior type players. Pitt, who was a bit of a train wreck last year, but they're going to be physical initially. Georgia Tech. I mean, if you're looking at the schedule, those are three games. You're going to have to play them somewhere, and that's a pretty good place to play them. Then you get that open date before a rivalry game. Florida State's going to be, a tough one regardless of where they're going to be played on the schedule next year. And then, Wake and BC before State gives you, and also having an open date that first or that second week of November, with how this team has really faded off during the last half of the season, last couple of years, having an open date in mid October and then another open date in the beginning of November. And of course, this is one of those weird seasons where there's 3 open dates for everybody. That helps a lot, I think, because that lets you really get geared up for that final 3 games of Wake, BC, and NC State. So you're not kind of limping into that last month. So I think this is a pretty darn good schedule. And it's one that if I were Mack Brown, I'd be pretty pleased with how this all shook together, and I'd be circling that Minnesota game to get a good start. But after that, you feel pretty good about this.
I agree with that. I mean, you got to get that Minnesota game. If you don't, then I wonder what Kenan Stadium looks like over the next couple of weeks, the next 3 weeks there. But Buck, I'm gonna call the schedule up here and sort of slide us off to the side. When you're looking at this schedule, let's kind of go good, bad, and ugly, and let's go what we don't like first. Is there anything when you look at this that you say, God, not complaining, but I really don't like that? But when you look at it first blush,
Well, I think I already said that, going to Virginia, that's like kryptonite for Mack Brown to start with. And, so they got to go to Virginia, and then they follow up the next week and having to go to Florida State. It was going to be a tall order for North Carolina to compete with Florida State this year anyway. But still, if you were going to complain about anything, I think that would be pretty much be it. Minnesota, I mean, they were not very good last year, and they're not particularly thought of to be great this year in the Big Ten. I think their early kind of conclusions is that they're at the very bottom tier of the Big Ten next year. So if North Carolina cannot beat Minnesota at Minnesota, it's going to be a bad sign, and so you're kind of sticking your neck out on the chopping block to start with. The game that is, I think, being underestimated by everybody is JMU. They had the second best offense and the second best defense in the Sun Belt. Well-coached team. They're going to be a tough out, even in Kenan on September 21st. So those are just some of my initial impressions.
Buck, the chat is saying that they need you louder. Go into those settings and jack it way up.
I'm doing my best, buddy. Doing my best.
They people trying to be funny, and George Miller, that was a Bahamas flag, my friend. Jason, you had a quick note about Florida State before I go to Vip and Barnes about the bad part of this.
Yeah, in terms of this being, kind of a tough thing in terms of going from, the at Virginia to at Florida State, the thing you also got to remember is it's not just about who or when you play whom, it's also about who they play before they play you. And Florida State's going to be coming off a road trip to Miami in that game. So, if you want to play Florida State this year, given Florida State's schedule, if there was one spot on their schedule that I would really want to play them, it's the week after they play Miami, which happens to be when North Carolina drew them. So,
and it's the week before they play Notre Dame.
Yeah. So, I mean, Florida State's toughest stretch of the season is Duke, Miami, North Carolina, Notre Dame. And, North Carolina is in that trap game spot. If there's a time to catch that Florida State team next year in Tallahassee, and it's going to be in Tallahassee, so it's not going to be easy, but if there's a time to catch that Florida State team, it's after a road trip to Miami and right before a road trip to Notre Dame, which I think, those may be the 2 best teams on their schedule other than, let's see. Yeah, I think that's the 2 best teams on their schedule looking at it. Maybe Clemson. So, they go Clemson, Open, Duke, Miami, North Carolina, Notre Dame. So, 2 of their 3 toughest games happen to be sandwiched around North Carolina. That's that's a good place to play them.
Be interesting to hear Mike Norvell's comments about the schedule. Be looking for those when the breakdown comes. Greg, and then Taylor. What's the bad part of the schedule for North Carolina? Because I'm not seeing a lot, really.
There are two things that I would note. Number one is that North Carolina opens the season with 7 straight games before that first bye. That's a lot. That's kind of nitpicking a little bit. I think NC State maybe has 8 straight. Louisville has 7 straight. But that's the most in the ACC. State's 8. So 7's a lot without a break, especially when you're talking about schedules that have 2 open dates in them. And then the other thing is that North Carolina, of course, is only playing on Saturdays this year. 2 opponents are not the week before. Wake plays Cal on a Friday night the week before they play Carolina. And then NC State, which is the big one, they play a Thursday night game against Georgia Tech before the season finale in Kenan Stadium. So State will get 2 extra days of rest, whereas Carolina, of course, will have to be up in BC in cold weather the Saturday before the NC State game.
Yeah, it's an interesting look, and that's what a lot of people, they look at their schedules in the whole and say, well, this, but y'all's point about where these games are in the bye weeks. I'm not sure I like 2 bye weeks. It makes the schedule really drag out. But Taylor, where's the hiccup or the bad part in here?
Yeah, and just a quick note on James Madison. I think North Carolina is catching James Madison at the right time, where their coach leaves for Indiana. Their star quarterback, Jordan McLeod, who threw for 35 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, is in the portal. I would be more worried about this game if it was last year. But I think when I'm looking at the schedule, the one part that I miss about the schedule, I feel like an old man about to go on a rant, but I miss seeing the Miamis. I miss seeing the Virginia Tech. So I'm looking at this schedule selfishly from a fan perspective and those rivalries that Carolina has kind of built. Now you still have the Duke game and Virginia and NC State, but I do miss, and this is 2 years that Carolina hasn't played Virginia Tech, taking a year off in the Miami series. And also selfishly, Greg kind of hinted at it with Boston College. I'm looking at the schedule in terms of what games I would want to go to and I wouldn't want to go to. I don't want to go to Boston in late November. I'm a cold football, not really my cup of tea. So for me, I wouldn't be really looking forward to that Boston College trip.
Taylor, just wait until 2025 when you get to watch Carolina play Stanford and at California as ACC games.
I can't wait.
Noted ACC football powers, Stanford and California. And I am surprised, Taylor, to hear you say that you'd like another FCS team on the North Carolina schedule, but I do understand a little bit.
When you look at it, and Buck, I'll get you back in here, talking about from a fan perspective, Buck.
Well, the early start. Can you guys hear me any better now? Is that better? From a fan perspective, the start of the season is brutal. It's going to be hot, and you're going to be watching NC Central and Kenan Stadium. That is not a recipe for a raucous crowd inside of Kenan Stadium. So I think North Carolina is going to have to sort of get through the early part of their schedule on their own steam, which shouldn't be that hard, but still is not going to. Even if they went 4-0 to start the season, I'm not sure anybody would get hyped up about that.
What's worse than going 4-0 though, Buck?
Going 0-4?
Going 2-2 or 3-1 even.
Yeah, any losses.
Yeah.
So you'll take that having to go 4-0 on your own steam against teams that you can that you feel comfortable that you've got a good chance to beat. I also am pretty nervous about that JMU game. And, Minnesota, I think, is a team that can beat you. I mean, they're going to be physical on the line of scrimmage. So, it's no guarantee that you're going to go 4-0 in those games. But you go 4-0 in those games, and you feel pretty darn good going into the month of November, or I mean into the month of October. That is, with that final game of September with the Duke game, and that's a Duke program again, replacing an awful lot. So, and against a head coach that Mack Brown is very familiar with. So, you feel pretty good about that. And this year, I really saw the value more than ever of having schedules that start out with some runway for teams to get better, and for teams to be able to manage the load of some of their best players and all of that. You want your schedule to be a little easier up front and, more difficult on the back end, I think, if possible, just because that when you have your tough games up front and you get banged up, you can be kind of really trying to tread water the rest of the season, and that can be pretty hard.
Yeah, but let me say this too. The last couple of years, we know what's happened with North Carolina, right? 2 of the years, you lose 4 of the last 5 against FBS opponents, and then last year you lose 4 straight after a 9-1 start. Talking about 2022. And as Mack has pointed out, well, part of that is because your schedule is a little bit tougher on the back end. Yeah, but the reason it's tougher on the back end is because you have a start like Carolina's going to have next year. So I think fans just need to be aware of that when you go into the season and Carolina gets out to maybe a 4-0 or 5-0 start, and everybody's saying, uh-oh, this team's really good. Is this a team that can really challenge for the ACC? If history has taught us anything, it's that pump the brakes a little bit. Let's see how they do once they get into the heart of ACC play, and maybe kind of calm down on the ACC title game talk until we get into November against some of these better opponents.
When I look at the schedule, though, and Greg, you talk about getting in the heart of the ACC schedule, and who knows what teams are going to look like come August, which, y'all mentioned JMU. They've lost a ton. Who knows what Duke's going to look like? I'm going to show up just to see Manny Diaz on the sidelines wearing Duke stuff. That's just bizarre to me. Minnesota, has lost their quarterback, but he wasn't very good, and it's up there. Greg, what is the heart of the ACC schedule with this? I mean, to Taylor's point, it just doesn't look like anything we've seen before. I mean, Georgia Tech's an albatross that Carolina's worn every year, it seems. Pitt is Pitt. But nothing on here looks like, oh, that's going to be a tough stretch there. That is a real tough stretch. I mean, at Virginia, at Florida State, is that it?
I really think after the first 6 games, and we can dive into it more, but there's a couple of games there that'll be tricky. But once you get into the back half of the schedule, I mean, Georgia Tech, I think it's going to be pretty good next year.
Yep.
They're good enough
and
to
Pitt's
beat Carolina.
Going to be dangerous too.
But, at Virginia, that's not a place where Carolina's had a ton of success, even though Virginia, they weren't any good last year, but they were good enough to beat Carolina. Right.
Yep.
At Florida State, speaks for itself. Who knows what Wake's going to look like in November? If they can shore up quarterback play a little bit, they'll at least be competitive. And then at BC in November, that's going to be tough. I mean, BC played Florida State competitively last year. Castellanos, I think that's how you say his name. He's a good quarterback. He's got to improve his accuracy, but he's a playmaker, and they return a lot offensively. And so if Hafley can get the defense turned around a little bit, that could be a competitive game. And then, of course, we know NC State should be pretty good this year. So I think there are some competitive games for North Carolina in the second half. This is not the North Carolina team from last year. And I think everybody needs to understand, yes, Max Johnson's a solid quarterback. He's not Drake May. And when you lose a lot of guys, on the offensive line, you lose some guys at wide receiver. This is going to take a little bit of time to kind of come together. And so this team may not be as good as what Carolina had on the field last year. And other teams are going to get better. So I just think once you get into that Georgia Tech game, things kind of toughen up in the ACC slate.
Vip, is it possible for North Carolina? This is an interesting question. We've always talked about how teams may be better, but the record's not as good. Is it possible for North Carolina to not be as good as they were last year, but have a better record given this schedule?
Yeah, I think so. But I think when I look at the schedule and you're trying to project and how good this Carolina team is and what games they should win or they shouldn't win, I think what we saw last year is outside of the Charlotte game and the Central game, like this North Carolina team has kind of lost the ability to be like, oh, this is a win, like 100% certainty. Put this game in the win column when you're losing as a 24.5 point favorite. You can't just look at the schedule and be like, at Virginia is a win or Georgia Tech's a win, which I think we have done in the past, or at least I have done in the past when I'm looking at the schedule. So really, every game, like Greg kind of said, has the chance to be a win. It has a chance to be a loss.
And to build on that, I would say that there are only 2 games on the schedule right now that I'm looking at for North Carolina where I would say Carolina is a clear underdog going into the season. 2.
But aren't there 2 games that North Carolina is the clear favorite as well?
There are 2 games where Carolina is a definite favorite. The problem, though, and this is something that, Greg, how many times have we talked about this on this podcast over the years, about if you want to be a team that's winning double-digit games in the season, you need to have 6 or 7 or 8 games on your schedule that you are just absolute clear, far and away, you ought to win that game. You're big favorites. If you want to be a 10 win team, which is getting easier, but because they keep extending the season, they keep adding games to it. But if you want to be a 10 win team, you want to go 10-2 in the regular season, right? Let's just make that the goal. If you're only a clear favorite in 2 games, well, I mean, yeah, you might only be a clear underdog in the other 2, but that means that you got 8 games where you are, maybe a little more likely to win than lose. But if you're 60% in all of those, then you might go 5-3. And so now you finish 7-5 on that schedule because you won the 2 games you're supposed to win, you lost the 2 games you're supposed to lose, and you went 5-3 in the games where they were closer to even. So, this is where this Carolina team is going to have to take, I think, a significant step forward against this schedule without Drake May to be able to improve on last year's schedule. Because, again, like a couple of you have already said, we don't know what Duke's going to be. I don't think Duke's going to be as good as they were last year, but they're probably not going to be a complete pushover. They've had, some traction in the transfer portal. They landed a good quarterback. Pitt is probably not going to be as bad as they were last year. Georgia Tech seems to have a pulse right now, and they may well be a team that is even or better next year. Virginia beat you last year. Wake Forest is not probably going to be a terrible team, and then Boston College, like Greg said, is not a pushover with Castellanos at quarterback. So, when you look at this, is 7-5 a good season? I don't think so, but it's absolutely the kind of record that I could see against this schedule. But I also could see 10-2 if everything broke right.
Let me talk about our sponsors, Johnny T-Shirt, because Jason just went where I'm going to pin y'all down on January 24th, 2024. What are we, 8 months away from the schedule, away from the season start? Johnny T-Shirt, sponsors of this podcast, sponsors of Inside Carolina, and great friends of Inside Carolina premium subscribers. Go check them out online or in person on East Franklin Street. You need some cold weather gear, they've got it. You need some warm weather gear if you're in North Carolina. It's going to be 75 degrees tomorrow. They've got that too. They've got anything you possibly can need, and you get 10% off if you're a premium subscriber. Check them out. National Guys Will Pay the Bills. This is a roundtable. North Carolina's 2024 schedule finally arrives. Okay, Buck, I'm going to bring you in here. Should we do predictions already?
Oh, hell no.
Ooh, a little win-loss.
We don't even have we don't even know who's going to be on
I'll do
roster.
wins and losses.
No.
I so bad want
That's
to.
brutal.
I know, really.
Yeah.
It's kind of like just shake it
I
up.
think
throw it
Tommy's
up.
on the verge of 12-0 is where he's
I'm
here.
you know.
Did I just
College
hear
football
12-0?
playoff.
Get past Minnesota, boys. It's on.
That's got that right there. That's our soundbite for the show right there. Social media. That's going to be our blurb right there. Is get past Minnesota and it's on.
Yeah, Minnesota is the South Carolina game in 2015, and then you get that one, and I can feel it. But given all the uncertainty, given Jeff Collins is the new DC, given that we hadn't really talked about the postmortem of last year, but those scars are still there. When you look at this, ceiling and floor, can we do that? Can we do that fairly?
Yeah,
What
I
needs
don't
to
think
be?
so. I mean, I really don't think so. They do talk about how the ESPN way too early is way too early, and it is. But it's even more so these days because of the transfer portal, and after the spring game, the rosters are going to change again. They may bring in more people from the transfer portal. If you go online now and try to even look for a depth chart of any of these teams, you're going to come out scratching your head because it's not going to be clear to you who's going to be playing where. So, yeah, I would hold off on the predictions right now until we can, see what we're looking at, and know kind of who's going to be where doing what.
I bet you Buck will talk about predictions when he's answering this question. The answer to that one, Gene Triplehorn, would be Buck Sanders, if I'm not mistaken.
Depends
Greg,
on how you
really?
do the calculation.
Greg, really quick, win or loss, Minnesota?
I'm gonna go loss. I can tell you why.
I'll do it, Bill. I'll do it. We can outnumber Buck. I'll go win at Minnesota. I'll go.
So look, they got Max Brosmer, who is a All-American from New Hampshire, at quarterback, and they got Darius Taylor back. They got 4 offensive linemen back. They've got Darnell Jeffries, if you remember the name, from Clemson. He didn't play last year. He was hurt. He's back at defensive tackle. I think Minnesota's going to be a lot better next year than they were this past year. So that's going to be a challenging opener for Mack Brown and the Tar Heels.
Yep, Greg just took my same reasoning as well. I was going to say a loss for that.
Wow.
I am still ticked that they moved that game to Thursday because I had my Minnesota weekend all planned out, and then they moved the game.
Idyllic climes of Minnesota.
I am. Well, it's also the Minnesota State Fair that week, and the Twins are at home during the week. They are not at home on the weekend, so it was set up perfectly to do the State Fair, the Carolina game, and the Twins game. People in the chat have not forgotten my prediction of a couple of years ago. Vip, what's your floor? No, go ahead, Vip. Tell us your record right here. We're putting you on record and on blast.
Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4. 7 and 5. I think would be my floor. I think there's too many games that you would expect Carolina to win, even though this team and this program has kind of shown that no game is a certainty. But when you have the Charlottes and the North Carolina Centrals, those kind of start stacking up pretty quickly, and the home schedule isn't too daunting. Where I think that's a huge determining factor on who wins a lot of these college games. So I would have my floor somewhere between 6 and 7, and then ceiling. I don't even know how to project the ceiling.
Well, you pick a number from.
I'll give you a ceiling.
12.
I think
12.
I think the ceiling. I think the ceiling is 10 wins.
You mentioned earlier not favored in 2 games. Clearly, at Florida State will be a not favored game. What's the other one you see here?
NC State.
You agree with that, Greg?
And I know. Look, there's some folks that are going to be in the chat that ain't going to be happy to hear that, But NC State killed the transfer portal this year. They did very, very well in meeting some significant needs that they had on that roster. And I think that's going to be a pretty complete and awfully physical football team. And toward the tail end of the season, until Carolina proves to me that they're ready to play football in the last month of the season, I'm gonna guess that they're not gonna be favored in that game and shouldn't be. They're gonna have to show me that they can win in November. And I think the last few years that's where we're at. So, yeah, I would say Florida State and NC State are two games where they won't be favored. And there are some real minds in there. I mean, I think the Minnesota game is going to be a tough game. I think JMU is going to be a tough game. I think Boston College is going to be a tough game. We don't know who's going to be on all these teams, but I see several teams where even if they did, let's say they catch Florida State in that trap spot and they beat Florida State, who they're, going to be underdogs against most likely. Okay, you get that one, but am I convinced that means that they'd go 11-1 and beat everybody else? I just don't think that's a realistic ceiling for this team. It's not Sam Howell or Drake May there, and they still have some things that they need to prove have been fully shored up in terms of defense and on the roster and first year under coordinator. So, I think 10-2 is your ceiling. I think somewhere around 5-7 or 6-6 is your floor, depending on injuries and other things. I think it's very unlikely that they would go worse than 6-6. But I don't see the kind of depth across the board on the line of scrimmage and in the program that says that they could absorb a 2015 or 2016 level rash of injuries and come out of that 9-3 or something like that. So I think there is some potential downside against this schedule.
And Tommy, let me just say this real quick. Buck mentioned about not having an idea about what these schedules or these rosters are going to look like. JMU got gutted in the portal because Kurt Signetti left. But then they bring in Bob Chesney, who has won 29 games the last 3 years at Holy Cross. So he's a young up-and-comer, but he's able to convince some guys to come out of the portal. He lands some decent names in the portal. And then he got Dylan Morris, who was the starter at Washington 2 years ago before Michael Penix showed up. And he threw for 2,500 yards for Washington a couple years ago. And I think he was all honorable mention Pac-12 the year before that. So, yeah, they lost McLeod, but they may have a decent quarterback, and then they've got some solid pieces around him. So, who knows what James Madison's going to look like? Signetti did a good job. Houston did a good job before that.
At Garden.
That sounds problematic. But I think JMU is a team that could be a lot better than some people are thinking they may be.
So who's Siri was talking there?
I don't have a Garden.
Yeah, it's not.
Buck, talk some sense to these people. James Madison, seriously. I'm giving you the floor.
I'm kind of with them. I'm kind of with them on the James Madison thing. That's the kind of game that North Carolina is just always poised to lose. Like Appalachian State coming in, and just it's their kind of their big game of the year. And they show up and they play with their hair on fire. That's a scenario of a game that North Carolina has lost in the past. So I wouldn't put it past them. Hopefully that won't be the case, but I don't think anybody can give anybody any assurances at this point. I just don't think it's possible. We'll see how it all goes. Lost a AirPod now. So at any rate, I'm having equipment problems here at the Sanders household, and apparently there's motion in my garden as well. So
the first thing they do when they come to do the whole home invasion, from what I've seen in the movies, is they usually cut the wires or whatever. So it sounds like maybe those technical problems might be a harbinger.
And then cut through the garden is how they get you.
Yeah, they come right through that garden. I don't know. You better make sure your windows are locked or whatever.
How does your garden grow? Let me ask y'all a question. James Madison's record in 2016 was what?
10-2. Well,
10
I think they may have won a bowl game too. So
No. They were 13-1 or 14-0.
2016, they won the FCS National Championship. They were 14-1. They played North Carolina in Chapel Hill and lost by 28. My stone cold lock is Carolina's not losing James Madison in Kenan Stadium.
Okay, now wait a minute.
That was an FCS team.
Same mess. It's
So
James
last
Madison.
year, JMU went into Virginia and won. Virginia beat Carolina,
Transitive property.
right? And then JMU did lose App State by 3. But Carolina
Tommy,
needed
you know what?
overtime to beat App State.
That kind of thinking, that's the kind of thinking that gets you beat real quick.
Hey, I don't play the game, but I would not. If this program is anywhere close to where we hear they are, those games like that need to be wins comfortably. I'll give y'all at Minnesota is going to be tough. I think Georgia Tech's always going to be tough until Carolina can prove they can beat them. Florida State is tough. Wake Forest, without Sam Hartman, I'm not sold on Wake. NC State's going to be a tough one, and I'll tell you what, I'm not going anywhere near Boston College in November 23rd. That's going to be an interesting game. I think the floor is 6. I think the ceiling's 10. But let me ask you this, and I'm going to ask all of you this. And I know they're FBS now, Greg. I know they've moved up a rank, but it's still James Madison. And I know some James Madison people, which is part of the reason why I'm digging.
And it's still App State, right? I mean, App State was FCS not that long ago. So, I mean, come on.
It's live radio. What? Okay, Taylor, you very opinionated and mostly right last year in post games and on your commentary. Sitting here on January 24th, what does 2024 need to look like for North Carolina to ditch the narrative that they're a declining program?
I think beating State would go a long way. I think not crumbling at the end of the season where Carolina finishes 1-4 almost every season against Power 5 teams would go a long way. I think those two, not crumbling at the end of the season and then showing that you can beat State.
But
beating State is it.
Yeah.
But what's your thoughts?
Well, here's a thought I've had in my head all day, and for tonight. But you may get your wish about the backup quarterback being the most favorite player your favorite player on the team this year, because Max Johnson has got a knack of getting hurt. So you can start picking out your number 2 right now and finding out how you feel about the reserve quarterback. That's always your favorite player. But that's so much about, and we've talked about this plenty of times, and we'll continue to talk about it until we die, is that at this point there's probably 35% of every team that's going to start the year that's not going to finish the year, right? I mean, injuries are part of the game now, and what is NC State going to look like if their quarterback goes down?
Grayson McCall.
Right.
Look an awful lot like they did last year, probably.
How is that going to work next year?
Ryan Finley's not walking through that door.
Yeah, we don't know. I mean, we just don't know.
Ryan Finley?
And the injuries are such a big part of the game. And, Max Johnson's got me a little nervous because he's only played one season from beginning to end, I think.
Yeah, and he got dinged up in that season too. He's not played a fully healthy season yet. That was the one thing that if you remember, I talked about when we first talked about him coming on board, is he's going to have to finish a season, and behind the way that Carolina's pass blocked the last couple of years, last 4 or 5 years, that might be challenging for him.
Could be a little challenging, I suppose. And there are other things that we still don't know. The North Carolina's offensive line is a complete, as porous as they've been against sacks in recent years, they don't have nearly as much experience on this offensive line as they've had the last 2 years. So how is that going to play out? And I think probably, for me, the wild card for this North Carolina season is, how does defense respond to Jeff Collins? That's going to be the key for me. If they go out and they play Minnesota, who Greg Barnes has got figured to be St. Louis' greatest show on turf, and they do a pretty good job against them, then maybe we'll start thinking about things differently right out of the gate. I think that's a big factor, a big unknown factor. Is the defense going to respond the way Jeff Collins' defenses have responded in the past? And what's that going to look like? And how is that going to help? I think they've got some real pieces on offense that is going to help, like Omarion Hampton, for example, number one.
I've heard of him.
They're going to have a good tight end room again. I guess Nesbitt and Copenhaver are both back, and they add Jake Johnson. I can see them doing a lot of 1-2 packages next year.
Yeah, Jake's the best of those three, by the way.
And the other two aren't slack.
No, those are good players, as you can remember from last couple of years. They've been good players, and I've graded them as such in the scouting reports. But just a little hint about what's coming in my scouting report of Max Johnson. He's better than both of them.
Jake Johnson, the brother.
Or Jake Johnson. Yeah, Jake. Yeah, Jake's better than both of them.
And I think they've got some hope at the wide receiver spot. I mean, we know that J.J. Jones is pretty solid. Kobe Pursuer comes back reasonably healthy. That's going to be another weapon on the wide receiver core. They've got some skill players and the tight end room, and we'll see how that all comes together. But the key is going to be, they're not going to be the offense that they've had the last 5 years. This is not going to be that offense. So for them to get to, to have that kind of record that is better than last year's, even if they're not as good a team, which would mean 9-3, then the defense is going to have to justify the faith that Mack Brown has in Jeff Collins. If Collins can get the job done there, and there's some good pieces on defense too. So that's the wild card in my opinion. We're not really going to know much about this Carolina team and what its potential is until we see how the defense responds on the field.
A quick point about Carolina finishing this schedule and not crumbling the way that they have the past couple of years. I don't know how many people have watched Boston College play, but I think Jeff Hafley has kind of got it figured out where if you don't have a good quarterback in college, get a fast quarterback. And Castellanos is one of the fastest quarterbacks and can be that quarterback that beats Carolina with his legs.
Yeah, he is lightning in a bottle. That guy caused headaches for a lot of teams last year.
Well, Jason, I'm going to let you go, and then I'm going to kick it to Greg to wrap it up. I'm dusting off my Mike Thomas jersey. Of course, Thomas wore 15 at Carolina, but speaking of fast, I mean, Connor Harrell is lightning fast. You just can't get dinged up because the wheels run flat when you twist an ankle, and we saw that happen in the bowl game. Jason, sort of wrap us up. What's Carolina need to do to show progress or to keep the narrative that the program is in decline off out of Chapel Hill for 2024?
Got to win all your in-state games. Beat Duke.
Charlotte, Central, Duke, Wake, State.
Charlotte, Central, Duke, Wake, and State. You win those games, and I think you've taken care of business. I mean, Mack Brown has, from the time he took this job the first time, and then the time he took this job at the beginning of Mack Brown 2.0, what did he emphasize? Being the premier team in the state of North Carolina, right? How many times have we heard him emphasize that? You can't be the premier team in the state of North Carolina and not be able to beat your biggest rival. right? You can't lose to NC State year in, year out and be the premier team. That right there is why, if you go back 2 years ago and they beat NC State instead of giving up that late play and, you know, the whole onside, the whole debacle there, they dominated most of that game. They win that game. The entire narrative around the North Carolina program is different for the rest of the offseason going into last year. It's your last game. It's against your biggest in-state rival. You got to win that game. And you can't lose to Duke, and you can't lose to Wake Forest, and you can't lose, obviously, to the other two. Win your in-state games, and you've shown, and the narrative around the program being a program in decline changes.
I agree with that. One way, if you're a small business or medium-sized business, you can win the state is get on board with Congruity HR. You see their logo all over our screen here. Congruity, the newest sponsor. We've been with Congruity for 6 months now, and they are strong in the field of HR and payroll outsourcing. Go to congruityhr.com/Tar Heels. Get a free assessment for your small to mid-sized business. They'll grow you from a local business to a national business. They did it themselves. They can do it for you with technology, customer service, Darren and Matt and all those guys. And like I said, if they are a sponsor of Inside Carolina, then we as Inside Carolina watchers and listeners need to take care of them and go check them out. Greg, I'm going to let you sort of close this out. Buck says there's a ton we don't know, but there's a ton we do know, and that is that the schedule is what it is at this point. Not going to do predictions, not going to do any more of that. Want Greg Barnes, the hardcore, what this program needs to do to change the narrative in 2024.
Well, look, I think this is really an opportunity for North Carolina to kind of reestablish itself, first within the fan base, but then on a kind of regional and national scale. In April, Drake May is probably going to go top 5 in the NFL draft. And what people are going to be talking about is, wait a minute, they won 9 games and then 8 games with the top 5 draft pick. What's going to happen to the program moving forward? And I think Mack Brown did some good things this offseason, both in the portal as well as bringing in Jeff Collins. I think that's the more I think about it, the more I like that hire. The fact that Jeff has been a head coach. His resume as a defensive coordinator is fantastic. I think that has potential as already has been laid out tonight. I agree with Jason about winning the state. But when you look at what this program is going to be going into the season, when everybody's at ACC kickoff in Charlotte, what's the conversation going to be about? It's going to be about Florida State and all their heartache from this past year and trying to get back and trying to win the ACC again. It's going to be about Clemson winning 5 straight at the end of the year to get to 9-4 and everything they've got coming back. It's going to be about Miami signing another top 10 class, bringing in Cam Ward at quarterback. Can they finally take a step forward? It's going to be about SMU, which had a fantastic year last year, did a really good job in the portal, and Preston Stone's coming back. And he's a kid who – it's like a dark horse Heisman candidate at quarterback. He's a fantastic player. And then you've got Louisville. And what Brom's doing with the transfer portal is amazing. I mean, he's just completely replacing his roster seemingly every year in the portal.
And with legit players.
Right.
They killed the portal this year.
Yeah. And so quarterback's a little bit of an issue for him. But beyond that, that's going to be a very solid team. That's a bunch of teams that are going to be in the conversation to get to the ACC championship game. North Carolina will not be in that mix. So what that means is that Carolina can operate kind of below the headlines, if you will. And they're not going to have Drake May. They're not going to have Sam Howell to get all the attention and say, yeah, well, they just rely on their quarterback. That will not be the case. So that sets this opportunity for Mack Brown and his coaching staff to really perform at a team level and win games as a team. And I don't know that we've really seen that out of North Carolina other than maybe 2020 when they went to the Orange Bowl. And if you can succeed in that regard and you can have an offense and a defense that really plays well off of one another, even if neither one's elite, you can win a lot of games and you can be competitive. And I think that's what we need to see. And then as you get late in the year, I mean, look at Clemson. Clemson was considered a dumpster fire by some people midway through the season last year. Dabo turned it around. They won 5 straight in the year. They got to 9-4. And nobody's talking about them being a disappointment. So all these things kind of come together where if North Carolina can work together as a team, really showcase what they've put together both through recruiting, the high school ranks, and the portal. They have a pretty good coaching staff in place now. You've got good depth. This is going to be, year 6 of Mack Brown? There's the opportunity for this team to be better as an overall unit. You have to make that happen. It's not going to be easy because you can't just lean on Drake May to win games for you. But I think the path is there for this team to kind of really grind behind the scenes and put a product on the field that while they may not make the ACC championship game this fall, the fans can say, wait a minute, this team, yeah, they may have only won 8 games. They looked really good. This looks like a team that has potential next year to take a step forward. And I think more than anything, that's what the fan base needs to see. And that's what regional reporters and even national guys need to be able to see to wonder if this Mack Brown project is going to work as he works into his 70s.
I'm going to leave it as is, folks. It's Greg Barnes speaking the narrative of North Carolina's season and what needs to happen. Shout out to Taylor Vippolis. Shout out to Buck Sanders as always. The president joining us is always awesome. Jason Staples, Greg Barnes. A lot of content coming from Inside Carolina. Of course, we will do some sort of post-mortem pre-spring podcast with this group as we get closer to spring practice. Jason's got his breakdowns, his scouting reports, portal guys, newcomers, and always you'll get the weekly content from the beat staff and Joey and the Coast crew and all those folks. Johnny T-shirt congruity, your job's to support them. Hit the like button, subscribe, all that good stuff. Whatever you do, just stay tuned to Inside Carolina as much as possible. Thanks, guys. We'll talk soon.